She claimed me on the marble floor of her own centenary gala, in front of 300 of the oldest names in the country, 3 years after she put her signature on the paper that cut my department and put me out on the street, not knowing, because I never told her, that I was carrying her child when she did it. I had spent those 3 years building a life out of sugar and silence, raising a daughter alone in 2 rented rooms, certain that the cold alpha who owned the tower I once worked in had forgotten my name the day she signed it.
Hi everyone! Thank you for staying with me. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Stay close, stay connected.
And then a storm locked us both inside that tower, the night before her gala, and she met the little girl I had hidden from the whole world, and something in that exact, contained, unreadable face came apart. And the next night, when her own grandmother tried to have me dragged out of the hall by security like a thief, Iseult Verre stepped down off the dais in front of everyone, crossed the floor to where I stood with our daughter on my hip, and said the sentence that ended one life of mine and began another. Put your hands down. If you want the uncensored, too hot for YouTube version of this story, the parts I cannot tell here, it is on my Patreon, link in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I have to go back, because a woman does not end up holding her hidden daughter in the middle of a gala she was hired into anonymously, without 3 years of not telling the truth to the one person who had a right to it. And I need you to understand the not telling, because it is the whole of me. My name is Esme Calder, and I work in sugar. Not pastry exactly, though I can do that too. Sugar. The hard, impossible, beautiful part. The pulled sugar ribbons and the blown sugar spheres and the spun caramel veils and the great architectural showpieces that stand on a banquet table like something that should not be able to stand at all, a cathedral made of something that wants, at every second, to collapse back into the syrup it came from. It is the most unforgiving material in the kitchen. It will punish you for the humidity in the room, for the warmth of your own hands, for a half second of inattention. And it does not care that you have nowhere else to go. I loved it the way you love a thing that is exactly as hard as you are. I had one thing, and I want to set it down plainly because it is the engine of everything that happened to me. I could read sugar. Not the way they teach it, not the thermometer, not the stages, hardball and soft crack and all the rest that you memorize in your first year. I could feel, with my hands and my breath and something behind my sternum that I have never had a name for, exactly what a piece of sugar was about to do. Give me a half-set caramel and I could tell you, to the minute, when it would seize. Give me a pulled sugar armature holding up a 2-foot showpiece in a warm room, and I could feel the moment it began, somewhere deep in its glassy bones, to give, a full minute before it sagged, before anyone else in the kitchen had looked up. It is not a thing you can learn. They try to teach it, and they cannot. You either feel the sugar talking, or you do not. And I had felt it since I was a girl, standing on a stool beside my grandmother with my hands stinging from the heat. And it had made me, by 26, quietly extraordinary and just as quietly invisible, which in my experience are almost always the same woman. I should show you the gift in action before I tell you what it cost me, because otherwise it is only a claim. And I have spent my whole life refusing to be only a claim. There was a wedding, years ago, before any of this. A great society wedding with a showpiece that another shop had built and delivered. A swan of pulled sugar 2 feet tall, and I was only there as a hired hand to set the dessert tables. Nobody. Invisible. And I walked past that swan in the heat of a packed marquee, and I stopped, because I could feel it. I cannot tell you how. The room was warm, and the swan was beautiful, and every single person in that marquee saw a finished, perfect thing. And I felt, somewhere behind my sternum, the exact sound a sugar armature makes when it has begun, deep in its glassy bones, to give, a sound that is not a sound, a wrongness, a thing about to seize. I told the catering manager the swan was going to come down. He looked at me the way you look at a hired hand who has opinions. And he told me it had been built by the best shop in the city and to mind my tables. And I stood there, invisible, in an agony of knowing. And I watched a thing I could have saved. And 40 minutes later, in the middle of the speeches, The swan's neck failed exactly where I had felt it failing, and the whole 2 feet of it came down across the cake in front of 300 guests. Nobody knew that a nameless girl setting tables had felt it coming. That is the gift, and that is the curse, both at once, the same woman. I am early, and I am invisible. And I learned a long time ago that being early is worth nothing at all if you have made yourself too small to be believed when you say the thing is going to break. Remember that. It is the whole of what I had to unlearn. My grandmother is the reason for the thermometer, and the thermometer is the reason you are going to believe the rest, so let me set her down properly. She raised me. My mother was a name on a card, and my grandmother was a pair of burned hands at a marble slab. So I had my grandmother, and she had been a confectioner in the old way, in a city that does not exist anymore the way she knew it. And she could turn boiled sugar into roses and ribbons and birds. She could coax a living thing out of a thing that has no life in it at all. She had a sugar thermometer, a slim old probe in a dented copper case on a worn ribbon, the brass gone soft at the edges from 40 years in an apron pocket. And the first true memory I have of being myself is her looping that ribbon over my too small head and folding my hand around the warm copper and saying the thing I have built my whole craft on. Sugar tells you the truth before it breaks, Esme. She did not make a fuss of what I could do, the way I could put a hand near a cooling tray and know which piece would crack. She made it ordinary. I understand now that it was the wisest and most protective thing she could have done, because she had seen what the world does to a poor girl who is gifted out loud. When she died, I was 19, and the only thing I took from her one room was that copper thermometer. And I have not worked a single showpiece without it in my apron pocket in 7 years. And on the night the storm came, it was in my pocket in a tower 40 floors above the city, because I do not work without it. Remember the thermometer. It comes back, the way the sugar always does. I have to tell you about Iseult Verre, and I have to tell you about the way I knew her before I knew what she was, because everything that broke in me broke in the order it was built. And I built it 3 years ago, in the low, warm hours of a kitchen that does not exist for me anymore. I was an in-house cake artist then at Iseult Verre, the old hotel and glass conglomerate, 100 years of marble lobbies and crystal, and a name that meant something in this city, the way a cathedral means something, more out of habit than belief. I had a department, a small one, 3 of us, and a cold room, and a marble slab and a wall of north light, and we made the showpieces for the great events the company hosted, the things that stood on the tables and made a hard room go quiet. I was the best pair of hands in that building, which I did not say out loud, because saying it had a cost I had already learned not to pay. She came down to the kitchens at night. That is the thing I have turned over 10,000 times since. Iseult Verre, newly installed then, the last heir of the house, 36 years old and already wearing the family the way you wear a coat that is too heavy. An alpha with a face that had decided a very long time ago to give nothing away. She could not sleep in those first months of taking the company, and she would come down to the one warm room in a cold building, the night kitchen, and she would sit on a stool at the end of my marble slab with a cup of coffee. She did not drink and watch me pull sugar for hours. She did not talk mostly. She watched my hands. And I, who had taught myself so thoroughly to be invisible, found that I could not be invisible to her, because she was looking, really looking, the way almost no one looks, at the one thing I could do. And there is no defense I have ever built that survives being looked at like that. I want to be honest about what it was, because I have spent 3 years lying to myself about it. It was the closest thing to being known that I had ever felt. I fell in love with the way that woman watched my hands in a cold kitchen at 2 a.m, and I told myself the whole time that it was nothing, that powerful women get bored, that I was a thing to look at the way the city was a thing to look at through the glass. I want to tell you about those nights properly, because they are the foundation everything else was built on and then buried, and I have never let myself walk back through them. She would come down around 1, when the hotel had gone quiet, and the night kitchen was just me and the hum of the cold room, and the small, violent sounds of sugar work. The first week she said almost nothing. She would take the stool at the end of the slab and set down a coffee she never drank and watch, and I learned the particular discipline of doing the hardest work of my craft under the eyes of the one person in the building who could end my employment with a sentence, and finding, this is the part I could not explain to anyone, that it made the work better, that her attention was a kind of heat I could pull sugar by. I started saving the difficult pieces for the late hours. I told myself it was the cool of the night that made them set right. It was not the cool of the night. It was that I had spent my whole life being looked past, and Iseult Verre looked at the one true thing about me as if it were the only thing in the building worth looking at, and a starved thing does not ask why it is being fed. And then, slowly, she began to talk. Not about the company, never about the company. The company was the cold thing she came down to the kitchen to escape, but about small things, sideways things. The things people say at 2 a.m. when the day selves have gone to bed. She told me her mother had died when she was 9, and the house had handed her to the dowager to be raised into an heir, and that she could not remember the last time someone had made her something with their hands that was not also a transaction. I made her things. That is how I said what I could not say. I would push a plate across the slab without a word, a flawed showpiece component, a sphere that had blown a hair off round, a curl of caramel that had not made the cut, and she would eat it slowly. This woman who ran 100 years of marble and crystal, this apex alpha. The whole building flinched around, and something in her face would come unguarded for exactly as long as the sugar lasted. I have thought since that I was the first person in a very long time to give Iseult Verre something and want nothing for it, and that she did not know what to do with it, and that neither did I, and that the not knowing was the most honest either of us had ever been with anyone. The burn scar on her left palm. She told me about it on one of those nights, a childhood kitchen fire, the only time she had ever been somewhere warm and unsupervised, and how she had pressed her thumb into it ever since, when a thing was too much to feel. A private valve. I watched her thumb find that scar 100 times across my marble slab, and learned to read it the way I read sugar. And I did not understand until much later that I had been the thing that was too much to feel. I have to tell you what happened between us, because it is the thing I have never told anyone, and it is the reason for the child, and the reason for the silence, and the reason for everything. It was not nothing. For one winter, it was the furthest thing from nothing I have ever lived. It built the way sugar builds, slow and then all at once and then dangerous, in 100 small unspoken hours at the end of a marble slab, until one night near the turn of the year, she reached across the cooling tray and stopped my hand with hers, her hand over the back of my hand, the way you would steady a thing you were afraid of breaking. And she said my name, just my name, Esme, in a voice I had never heard her use, the contained voice gone, and I turned my hand over under hers, and that was the beginning of the only season of my life I have never been able to look it straight. We were careful. God, we were careful. She was the heir of the house and I was the night cake artist, and we both knew exactly what the world does to that. So we kept it in the dark kitchen and the late hours. And we told no one. And for one winter, I had a thing I had never let myself want, which was to be loved by the person who looked at me like that. And then the restructuring came, and I learned what a woman like Iseult Verre is when the house puts its weight on her. I learned it the way you learn that sugar has turned. Too late, and all at once. For a few weeks that winter, I had the thing I had spent my whole life being careful never to want. And I want to tell you what it was because you have to know what was taken to understand why I could not say a word about the taking. It was not grand. We never went anywhere. We could not. That was the whole shape of it. The heir of the house and the night cake artist had exactly one room in the world where we were allowed to exist. And it was the night kitchen. So we made a life the size of a night kitchen. She would bring down the things she could not say to anyone else, and I would put them into sugar. I made her a single perfect sphere one night with something pressed inside it, a tiny folded thing she had to break the sugar to read. And the breaking of it was the most either of us ever said out loud about what we were. She started leaving before the morning shift with a particular look back from the door, a look I lived the next 24 hours on. I let myself, for the first time in my life, plan. Not out loud, never out loud, but in the private place behind the sternum where I keep the things I know before they show. I let myself imagine a version of the world where a woman like that could choose a woman like me in the daylight, and I knew it was impossible. And I planned it anyway. The way you cannot help running your tongue over a broken tooth. And then I missed a cycle, and a private terror became a private certainty. And for 11 days, I held the most enormous thing that had ever happened to me entirely alone, trying to find the shape of the sentence that would tell her, terrified of every shape. And before I could choose one, the house chose for both of us. That is the cruelty I have never gotten over. Not only that she signed the page, but that the page came in the exact 11-day window when I was carrying the proof that the night kitchen had been real. The timing made a liar of the whole winter. It made the looking into a thing that could be cut after all. The cuts came in February. I want to be precise about this because it is the wound the whole story is built on. And I told it wrong to myself for 3 years. The board, steered, though I did not know it then, by her grandmother, the dowager who really ran the house from behind the chair, handed Iseult a restructuring to sign in her first year. A thing designed to prove she would hold the line over her own heart, and on the list of departments to be cut was mine, the unprofitable one, the 3 women and the cold room and the marble slab, the sugar. And Iseult Verre signed it. She signed the paper that put me out on the street with her own black pen. And I found out the way you find out these things. In a meeting room with a severance envelope and a woman from Human Resources who would not look at me, and not a word from Iseult. Not a call, not a line. The woman who had said my name across a cooling tray 3 weeks before signed the thing that erased my department, and then did not so much as send me a message. And I understood, sitting in that room with the envelope in my hands, the shape of the world the way the powerful had always meant me to understand it. I had let myself be loved by the heir of the house, and the heir of the house had let the house have me when it asked. So I did the only thing my pride had left me. I did not fight it, and I did not call her, and I did not tell her the one thing that would have changed everything, because I had found out 11 days before the envelope that I was carrying her child. I have to give you the severance room because it is where I made the choice that shaped 3 years, and I made it in about 90 seconds, the way you make the worst choices. The woman from Human Resources slid the envelope across the table and recited the sentences they give you. The regret of the company, the generosity of the terms, the door, and the whole time I was waiting. I am ashamed of this, but the whole story is honest. I was waiting for the door to open and for Iseult to come in and stop it, to say there had been a mistake. I sat in that room, and I believed, with the stupid faith of a woman who has been loved in the dark, that the looking meant something, that 3 weeks ago she had said my name across a cooling tray, and that surely the woman who said your name like that does not let the house put you on the street. The door did not open. Iseult Verre did not come. There was only the envelope and the recital, and the careful, averted eyes of a stranger doing her job. And somewhere on a floor far above me, the heir of the house was not coming, would not come, had signed the page and moved on to the next page. And I understood that the looking had been exactly what I had first told myself it was, a powerful woman, briefly entertained by a thing to look at. And 11 days of secret in my body went very cold and very quiet. I took the envelope. I did not make a scene. I have a great deal of practice at not making a scene. I have to make you understand why I did not tell her. because it is the hinge, and because from the outside it looks like the stupidest thing a woman has ever done, and from the inside it was the only thing I could survive. In the Omega verse, there is no hiding what an alpha and an omega can make between them, and we had made it in that one careful winter. I was pregnant, certainly and impossibly, with Iseult Verre's child, and I found it out 11 days before she signed me out of her building and her life without a word. And I thought, I want to give you the exact shape of the thought, because I have carried it for 3 years. I thought if I tell her now, she will think I'm trying to buy my way back in with the one thing she cannot cut. She will think the child is a claim on the house. I had been the thing that was looked at and then cut. I was not going to let my daughter be the thing that was kept. So I took my severance and my grandmother's thermometer, and I walked out of that building, and I did not tell Iseult Verre that she was going to be a mother, and I raised our daughter alone, and I told myself every single day for 3 years that I had done the proud thing, the strong thing, the only thing. And somewhere under all of that, I knew that I had also done the cruel thing to her and to the child. And I could not look at it, so I poured myself into sugar and I did not look. Her name is Pip. I should tell you about her now because she is the truest thing I have ever made, and I did not make her out of sugar. She is almost 3, and she has my hair, the copper of it, and I did not let myself see it for a long time, and then I could not stop seeing it. She has Iseult's eyes, that particular dark gray, and Iseult's stillness, the way she goes quiet and watchful when a room changes, the way she watches hands. She is the reason I take the work I take. The anonymous agency shifts, the brutal hours, the gigs no one with a choice would take, because sugar pays when you are the best and ask no questions. And I had made myself the best and learned to ask no questions. She has a small lost shoe she will not sleep without, and a crayon drawing she made of 3 stick figures she calls us, that I have never had the heart to ask her about, because there are only 2 of us, and I do not know who the third one is. And I am terrified that the part of her that came from a stillness she has never met knows something I have spent 3 years pretending not to know. Remember Pip, remember the drawing. They come back, the way the truth always does. I have to tell you about the 3 years, because the not telling was not a single choice. It was 1,000 choices, 1 a day every day for 3 years, and they are the truest record of who I became. I want you to understand the texture of it, because people here raised a child alone, and they think of a hardship in the abstract. And it is not abstract, it is arithmetic. Start and saying yes because the start means the rent. It is learning which all-night work pays enough to cover a sitter and which does not. It is the particular shame of counting coins onto a kitchen table while a small person watches you and learns, without your ever saying it, that money is a thing that runs out. I became, in those 3 years, the best sugar hand in the city that no one could name, because anonymity was the only commodity I had to sell, and I sold it hard. The great houses and the grand weddings, all quietly fed by a woman whose name was on no menu, who came in the trade door and left before the guests arrived, who could build you a cathedral of sugar and would never, ever be photographed beside it. I had been invisible by accident as a girl. I made myself invisible on purpose as a mother, because invisible was safe. Because the one time I had let myself be seen, the house had cut me, and I was not going to be seen again. And through all of it, there was Pip, growing. That is the thing the arithmetic leaves out. That under the exhaustion and the coins on the table, there was the single most astonishing thing I have ever been near. A person assembling herself day by day out of nothing I could fully account for. She learned to walk in a sitter's front room. She learned my grandmother's thermometer was not a toy, and then, the way children do, made it the most precious object in her world anyway. Would not nap without the warm copper of it in her fist. And she watched. God, she watched. She would go still and grave when a room changed, when a stranger came, when my voice did the careful thing it does, and she would study faces and hands with an attention that was nobody's on my side of the family. A stillness I told myself was just her way, and did not let myself trace to its source. 3. I have only ever been able to count 2 of us. I put that drawing on the cold room wall of every kitchen I worked in for a year, and I never once let myself finish the thought it started. The gala came to me through the agency, which is the only way anything comes to me now. A centenary, 100 years of tarn and verre, and they wanted a sugar showpiece worthy of the century. Built on site over 2 days by hands good enough that no one would ask where they had come from. Discreet, anonymous, agency. No names. I did not know it was tarn and verre when I took it. I want you to believe that, because it matters. The agency does not tell you the client until you have signed. That is the whole point of the agency. And when the assignment sheet finally came through with the address on it, the Verre Tower, the glass crown of the house, the building I had been cut out of, I sat in my 2 rooms with Pip asleep in the next one. And I thought about turning it down. And then I thought about the rent, and the winter coat she had outgrown, and the simple arithmetic of a woman raising a child alone. And I did the thing that poverty always makes you do, which is decide that your pride is a luxury you cannot afford this month. I told myself I would never see her. A CEO does not come down to watch the caterers build a sugar tower. I had built my whole plan on her not looking, the same way I had once built it on her looking. I was wrong both times. I built for 2 days before the storm, and I have to tell you about the building, because it was the best work of my life. And I did it 40 floors above the one part of the city I had sworn never to go back to. And there is a particular madness in that. They gave me the great marble winter garden to work in, alone, after hours, which suited me. I work best with no one watching now, having once worked best with exactly one person watching. And I built a thing worthy of a century. A tower of pulled sugar as tall as a person, ribbon over ribbon over ribbon, each one drawn out by hand from a mass at exactly the temperature where it stops being syrup and starts being glass. That single fugitive window where sugar will do what you ask. And blown spheres, balloon thin, catching the light. And over it all, a veil of spun caramel, that gold cloud you make by flicking molten sugar off a whisk so it falls in threads finer than hair. It is the most fragile thing a person can make on purpose. A breath of humidity can dull it. A degree of warmth can slump it. It has to be built in a cool, dry room, and it has to be built fast. And it has to be built by someone who can feel, the whole time, exactly how close every element is to the edge of giving. And I could, and I did. And I stood back on the second evening and looked at the best thing my hands had ever made, standing in the cold blue light of a tower I had been cut out of. And I let myself feel for 1 minute that I had won something. Then the storm came and reminded me what I actually am, which is a woman who can feel things break a long time before they break, and who has never once been able to stop them. The storm came on the second night, and I have to slow all the way down for it because everything I had kept standing for 3 years came down in that storm, and I felt every floor of it fall. I was 40 floors up in the glass crown of the Verre Tower, alone in the great marble winter garden where the gala would be staged the next night, building the showpiece, a thing as tall as a person, all pulled sugar and blown spheres and a spun caramel veil, the best work of my life. Because I do my best work when I am trying not to think, and outside the weather that had been threatening all day finally broke. A real storm, the kind that comes off the water and throws itself at a glass building like it has a grievance. The rain hit the windows like gravel. The lightning came close enough to taste. And then, a little after 10, the power went. Not a flicker, a real failure. The whole grid on that side of the city going down at once. The tower dropping into darkness floor by floor, and then the low orange glow of the emergency lights coming up. One warm sodium lamp in all that cold, wet electric blue dark, and the building systems rebooting onto the storm protocol, which, I did not know this then, seals the executive floors. The doors locked, the lifts died, And I was 40 floors up in a sealed glass tower in a storm with my showpiece and my grandmother's thermometer. And I was not, it turned out, alone. Because Iseult Verre had not gone home. I have learned since that she almost never went home, that she had been sleeping in the tower for the better part of a year, in the way that people sleep who are running from a house instead of toward one. And when the power failed and the floor sealed, the only two people locked inside the glass crown of the Verre tower were the Alpha who owned it, and the Omega she had signed out of it 3 years before. I heard her before I saw her. A door that would not open, a low, even voice saying a word I could not make out, and then a torch beam swinging across the dark winter garden and finding me standing there in my apron beside a 2-foot tower of sugar, with the orange emergency light on one side of my face. And the beam stopped and the voice stopped. And there was a silence I have never heard the like of before or since. And then she said my name. Now, and I understood, standing there in the wreck of the life I had built specifically so that this would never happen, that there is no plan a careful woman can build that survives the person who knows how she pulls sugar walking out of the dark and saying her name. I am not going to be able to tell you that night the way it happened, because it did not happen in order. A storm does not happen in order, and neither does 3 years of silence coming apart. But I have to give you the shape of it. We were locked in. There was no one to perform for, and nowhere to go, and no version of either of us that could pretend the other was not there. And so for the first time in our lives, we simply talked, in the dark, by the one warm lamp, while the storm threw itself at the glass. She told me things I had built my whole grief on never knowing. She told me she had not signed the cuts to be rid of me, that the board had handed her my department specifically because they knew about us, that her grandmother had known, had always known, and had chosen my department as the price of proving Iseult would hold the line over her own heart. A test, a loyalty oath written in other people's jobs. She told me she had signed it because she had been 23 years a coward in a cold house, and she did not yet know she was allowed to refuse, and that she had not called me afterward because she could not look at what she had done, and that she had spent 3 years thinking I had walked out of that building hating her, which I had, and that she had deserved it, which she had. And I sat in the orange dark with the truth I had been carrying for 3 years, sitting in my chest like a thing about to seize, and I did not tell her. Even then, even hearing all of it, I held the one fact that would change everything, and I held my own hand, and I did not tell her, because I did not yet know how, and because Pip was asleep 2 floors down in the linen room where I had made her a nest of tablecloths, and I was so afraid. She told me about the match, too, in the orange dark, and I have to give it to you because it is the shape of the cage she had been living in. There was a bond arranged for her, had been for years, a polished alpha called Solène Marchetti, the company's chief operating officer, a woman the dowager had chosen the way you choose a sound investment, capable, controllable, of the right blood, a consort who would run the operations and want nothing the house was not prepared to give. Honora had been engineering it for a decade, the careful merger of the air and the safe match, the century's tidy succession. Iseult told me in the dark, with the rain on the glass, that she had never been able to make herself want it, and had never let herself ask why, until a sugar artist had pushed a flawed sphere across a marble slab and wanted nothing for it. And she had understood too late what she had been refusing, and then signed the page that sent the answer away. She had not touched the arrangement since. She had not ended it either, because ending it meant explaining, and explaining meant naming the thing she had lost, and the air of a cold house does not name her losses. So she had simply gone on sleeping in the tower, neither married nor free, for 3 years, in the exact shape of a woman waiting for a door to open that she herself had locked. I listened to all of it in the dark, and I understood that we had spent 3 years in the same posture, she and I, both of us frozen at the moment of the cut, both of us telling ourselves a story about pride, both of us raising a wall in the dark. The difference was that I had a small warm reason to get up in the mornings, and she had a tower. I have to tell you about Bert, because every long night in a building that is trying to stay alive has one old soul keeping it alive, and ours was Bert Ori, the night chief engineer, 64 years old, and 4 decades in that tower, who knew the building's storm bones the way I know sugar, and who got to us a little after midnight through a service stair with a master key and a flask of tea, and who took one look at the two of us sitting in the dark not touching and understood, the way the people who run the dark always understand, the thing neither of us was saying. He did not push. He sat with us a while and kept the one lamp company. And before he went back down to wherever a man goes to keep a tower alive in a storm, he asked me the question. He asked it to me, not to her, in a low voice while she was turned away. He said, "Girl, let me ask you something, and don't answer fast. The night they put you out of this building..." And I could not answer him, because for 3 years it had been only the worst night. The night I lost the kitchen, and the woman, and the life. And the idea that it had also been the night that gave me Pip. The night that started the only thing I have ever loved without reservation. The idea that the worst night and the first night were the same night was a thing I had built my whole self specifically so that I would never have to feel. Bert did not wait for an answer. He put his old burned hand on my shoulder, a sugar worker's hand, I realized, an old confectioner's scar across the back of it. And he said, "The truest things we make on the worst nights." And then the lightning lit the whole glass crown white, and somewhere 2 floors down a small voice that I would know at the bottom of the sea started to cry, and I was on my feet before I had decided to move. After Bert went back down to his tower, I sat by the lamp with his question working in me like heat working into sugar, slow, and then everywhere at once. And I came the closest I had come in 3 years to saying it. I had spent 3 years not listening. I had built a whole life out of not listening, a fortress of agency shifts and trade doors, and a child who drew 3 figures and was only allowed to know 2. And I sat in the orange dark on the worst and first night, with the woman I had never stopped. I could finally say it to myself in that room with the rain coming down, the woman I had never stopped loving. And I opened my mouth to break 3 years of silence. And I was not fast enough. The truth I had refused to say chose its own moment to be said. The way the truest things always do. The way the sugar breaks exactly when it decides to, and not when you are ready. 2 floors down, a small voice that I would know at the bottom of the sea began to cry in the dark, and the choice was taken out of my hands, and I was on my feet and moving before I had decided anything at all. Pip had woken alone in the dark in a strange building in a storm. And she had done what she always does, which is go looking for me, and a almost 3-year-old in a sealed tower in the dark is the single most frightening arithmetic I know. And I went down that dead service stair 2 at a time with my heart in my mouth. And Iseult came with me. That is the thing. She did not ask whose child was crying in her sealed tower at midnight. She just came, fast and certain, the master key in her hand, opening the doors the storm had locked, lighting the stair with her torch so I would not fall. And we came into the linen room together, and there was Pip, standing in her nest of tablecloths with her lost shoe in one hand and her face a ruin. And she saw me and reached up, and I caught her. And she buried herself in my neck and went quiet the way she does. And I turned around with my daughter on my hip in the orange dark. And Iseult Verre was looking at her, at Pip, at the copper hair, and the dark gray eyes, and the stillness that had come back into the small face the second she was safe. The exact stillness, the watchfulness, the thing I had spent 3 years pretending I did not recognize. And I watched it go through her. I watched the most contained face I have ever known come apart by degrees. Watched her look at my daughter and do the arithmetic that I had refused to let her do for 3 years. The winter, the cuts, the 3 years, the copper hair, the gray eyes that were her own gray eyes looking back at her out of a child's face. And her thumb went to the old burn scar on her left palm and pressed there, hard, the only crack in all that glass. And she said, in a voice with nothing left in it but the truth, as I could have lied. But I had a child on my hip who would not sleep without a shoe, and who had drawn 3 stick figures and called them us. And I had a grandmother's voice in my chest saying, "Sugar tells you the truth before it breaks." And I was so tired. I was 3 years tired. And I looked at the woman I had loved in a cold kitchen and signed out of my life and never told. And I told her the truth at last. I said, "She's 2 years and 9 months. Her name is Pip. I found out 11 days before you signed the cuts, and I didn't tell you because I couldn't stand for her to be the thing the house made you keep. She's yours, Iseult. She's been yours the whole time. What I can give you is the first touch." Because it was 3 years in coming and it undid me. And because it was nothing like I had braced for. After Pip pointed at the drawing and asked, "Is that you?" And Iseult could not answer because she was weeping too hard to speak. The 3 of us ended up on the floor of that linen room in the orange dark. Pip in my lap winding down into the boneless heaviness of a child going back to sleep. And Iseult an arm's length away, not reaching, holding herself with both arms, the way you hold a thing that wants to fly apart. And I did the thing I had not let myself do in 3 years, the thing I had walked out of a severance room rather than do. I closed the distance. I reached across the dark, and I put my hand over the burn scar on her left palm, over the place she presses when a thing is too much. My hand over the back of her hand, the way she had once stopped my hand across a cooling tray, and I said the only true thing I had left. "You're allowed to feel it. You don't have to press it down." And the heir of the House of Tarn and Verre turned her hand over under mine, the way I had once turned mine over under hers, and held on. And we sat there in the wreck of 3 years with our daughter sleeping between us and the storm spending itself against the glass. 2 women who had loved each other in the dark and lost each other in the dark and were, for the first time, neither loving nor losing, but simply telling the truth in the dark, which is harder than both, and the only thing either of us had never tried. I want to be honest. Nothing was fixed that night. 3 years of damage is not a thing a storm undoes, but something started, the way sugar starts, slow, and then all at once, at exactly the temperature where the syrup decides to become glass. And I felt it start, the way I feel everything, a long minute before it showed. And for once in my life, the thing I felt coming was not a thing about to break. I'm not going to be able to give you that night fully, the rest of it, because some of it is mine and some of it is hers, and some of it is too much for this side of the screen. The thing she said to Pip, the thing she said to me, the careful 3 years of damage we began, by the one warm lamp in the sealed dark, to learn whether we could mend. But I have to give you the morning, because the storm broke before dawn, and the power came back floor by floor, and the doors unsealed, and with the light came the gala, and with the gala came the house. And the house, when it learned what the storm had trapped in its tower, did not soften the way Iseult had softened. The house did what the house does. By mid-morning, the dowager knew. Her grandmother, Iseult Verre, the chair emerita, who had run the family from behind the chair for 40 years, who had chosen my department 3 years ago as the price of a loyalty oath, she knew that the anonymous agency sugar artist 40 floors up was the omega from the kitchen. And she knew, because Iseult Verre misses nothing, exactly whose gray eyes were looking out of the child's face. And she did the arithmetic too, and where Iseult had seen a daughter, Honora saw a problem with a solution. She had a gala to run, 100 years of the house to perform, a board, a city, a careful succession she had been engineering for a decade with a safe bond match already chosen. Solène Marchetti, the polished alpha COO, the controllable heir consort. And here, on the morning of the centenary, was a working-class omega with a claim on the bloodline and a child who was the actual heir. So Honora made me an offer, in a quiet room off the winter garden, with the gala being built around us, the way the powerful always make offers. Generous, final, and shaped like a threat, a sum of money I had never seen the like of, a non-disclosure, a clean exit today, before the gala, the child's parentage sealed and the child quietly provided for from a distance. and Esme called her gone from the story of the house forever. "You understand," she said, "that this is the kindest version. I have to set Iseult Verre down properly, because a villain who is only cold is not frightening, and Iseult was frightening because she was in her own mind the only adult in the house. She had run Tarn Verre from behind the chair for 40 years, through her husband, then her son, now her granddaughter, and she had done it by understanding, earlier and more clearly than anyone, that a house like theirs is not a family. It is a structure, and that a structure survives by pruning. She had pruned my department to test an heir. She had pruned, I would learn, a great many things over 40 years. Inconvenient marriages, embarrassing sons, the soft people who marry into hard houses expecting warmth. She had even, 3 years ago, when a quiet report reached her that the cut night kitchen Omega had been seen unwell, made a discreet inquiry and learned there might be a child, and had decided, this is the part that I cannot forgive and cannot stop admiring the cold completeness of, that an heir's bastard raised by a vanished Omega was a loose thread best left exactly where it was, untraceable, deniable, prunable later, if it ever grew back toward the house. And now the thread had walked back into the tower in a storm and tied itself in front of witnesses to the heir, and Iseult Verre sat across a small table from me on the morning of her century and did the only thing 40 years of pruning had taught her to do, which was offer the gardener a price. I want you to understand that she was not, in that moment, angry. Anger is for people who have lost control. Honora was perfectly calm because she had not yet lost control, and she did not believe she could, and that calm was the most frightening thing in the room. I have to tell you what I almost did, because it is the truest test I have ever failed and then passed. I almost took it. I want to be honest because the whole story is honest. I stood in that quiet room with a number on a piece of paper that would have meant Pip never wanted for anything again. Never took an outgrown coat into another winter. Never watched her mother count coins at a kitchen table. And I had spent 3 years believing that protecting her meant keeping her out of the reach of the house. And here was the house offering to pay me to do exactly the thing I had already done. And for one long moment, the old fear had me, and my hand was halfway to the pen. And then I thought about the drawing. 3 stick figures. My daughter had drawn a family with 3 people in it before she had ever met the third one, because some part of her had always known there was a third one. And I had spent 3 years teaching her, without meaning to, that the third one was a hole where a person should be. And I understood, standing there with my hand on the pen, that I had been about to do it again, to choose the hole over the person, the safe absence over the dangerous love, the same cowardice Iseult had shown with her black pen 3 years ago, dressed up as a mother's sacrifice. I was listening. And the truth was that I would rather give my daughter a real father she had to share with a cruel house than a clean check and a hole where a person should be. I put the pen down. I told Iseult Verre no. And then I went to find the dress they had given me to serve in. And I put Pip on my hip. And I walked out into the centenary gala of the House of Tarn Verre, into 300 of the oldest names in the country, because I was done hiding my daughter in linen rooms. And if the house wanted me gone, it was going to have to do it in the light. I have to tell you about walking in, because it was the bravest thing I have ever done. And it did not feel brave. It felt like stepping off a roof. They had given the agency staff plain dark dresses to serve in, and I put mine on in a back room with my heart going like a struck thing, and I picked up Pip. I would not leave her with a stranger in that building. Not that day, not ever again. And I carried her out of the service corridor and through the great doors into the centenary gala of the House of Tarn Verre. And it was beautiful. I will give the house that. 100 years of marble and crystal under the winter garden glass. 300 of the oldest names in the country in their finest. A string ensemble. The cold January city spread out beyond the windows under a sky the storm had scrubbed clean. And at the center of it all, on the center table, lit like a held breath, the sugar tower I had built, the best thing my hands had ever made, with 300 people moving around it who would never know that a woman in a server's dress with a child on her hip had drawn every one of those ribbons out of the dark by hand. I stood at the edge of that room, and I felt every old instinct I had screaming at me to be invisible, to put the child down, to slip out the trade door the way I had slipped out of 100 grand rooms, to be no one. And I found Iseult across the hall, up on the dais where the dowager was arranging the century, the safe match Solène at her shoulder, the whole performed future of the house standing in a row. And Iseult was not looking at the room. She was looking for me. I watched her find me, a server with a child at the edge of her grandmother's perfect century. And I watched her go very still, and I lifted my chin, and I did not slip out the trade door. I stayed in the light. That was the whole of my courage, and it was enough, because the house could not stand a thing in the light, and I had finally understood that this was a weapon, and not only a wound. It tried. I have to tell you how the public part happened, because it is the reason a private 3-year wound became a thing that could never be made small again. And it is the moment everything turned. The gala was at its height. The marble winter garden full of crystal and 100 years of the house. The showpiece I had built standing on the center table like the best thing I had ever made. And the dowager at the head of it all, presenting the century, presenting the succession, the safe match Solène at her shoulder, the careful future of the house arranged like a table, when she saw me standing at the edge of the hall in a server's dress with a copper-haired child on my hip, refusing to leave, and Iseult Verre, who does not raise her voice, did the cold thing. She signaled the smallest gesture, and 2 members of the house's security detail began to move toward me through the crowd, quiet and polite and absolutely certain, to remove the trespassing former employee and her child before they could embarrass the century. And the hall began to notice, the way a hall does, the small wrong thing at the edge of the perfect room, 300 faces turning, and a hand closed on my arm, and I held my daughter, and I lifted my chin, and I prepared to be dragged out of the light of the house one more time. And then a voice came across the whole hall, the contained voice, not raised, never raised, but pitched to carry to every corner of that marble room. And it said, "Put your hands down." Iseult Verre came down off the dais. I have to give it to you slowly, because I have replayed it more than any other moment of my life, in front of 300 of the oldest names in the country, in front of her grandmother and the board and the safe match and the whole performed century of the house. The heir of Tarn and Verre walked down off the platform where her succession was being arranged, crossed the marble floor, and the security men's hands came off my arm. And she stopped in front of where I stood with our daughter on my hip. And she did not look at the room. She looked at Pip, and then at me, and her thumb was pressed white against the burn scar on her palm, the only crack in all that glass. And she said it to the whole hall, in the even voice, the truth she had carried for one stormlock night, and that I had carried for 3 years. 3 years ago, this house made me sign a paper that put this woman out on the street. I signed it because I was a coward, and I have been a coward for most of my life in this family, and I am finished. Her name is Esme Calder. She is the finest pair of hands this house has ever employed, and the house cut her to test me. And then she turned to her grandmother, and the whole century of the house held its breath, and she said, "You will not touch them. You will not buy them. There is no clean version and no unkind version." She claimed me there, in front of all of them. She turned back to me in the silence of 300 people who would tell this story for the rest of their lives. And she took my free hand the way she had taken it once across a cooling tray, her hand over the back of mine, and she said low now, just to me, the contained voice all the way gone, "I should have refused the paper. I should have called you the next morning." And Pip, on my hip with the whole house staring, looked at this woman holding her mother's hand, and she did the thing she does, the going quiet, the watchfulness, the deciding. And then she reached out one small hand and pressed it flat to the burn scar on Iseult's palm, the exact place Iseult presses her own thumb when something is too much, as if she had always known where the crack was. And she said, in the clear, high voice of an almost 3-year-old that carried across the whole marble room, "Don't be sad." And the heir of the house of Tarn and Verre, who had not wept in front of another living person in 20 years, put her forehead down against our daughter's small hand and wept. I have to tell you the shape of what came after, because a claim made in front of 300 people cannot be unmade. And the house learned that the way I had learned everything, all at once and too late. Iseult Verre had built her power on the careful arrangement of other people's lives, the quiet votes, the sealed parentages, the loyalty oaths written in cut departments, and all of it depended on nothing ever being said in the light. Iseult had just said all of it in the light, to the century, on the record. In front of the press, the house had so carefully invited. The dowager could ruin a nameless agency Omega in the dark. She could not, in front of 300 witnesses and a bank of cameras, be seen to throw her own great-granddaughter and the heir of the house out into the street, not after the heir had named the child her blood and the city had heard it. The story got out the way stories do, and it was not a scandal. It was the opposite of a scandal. It was the heir of a cold old house choosing in public the working girl her family had cut and the child they had tried to bury. And the city, it turns out, has a great deal more appetite for that story than the house's careful century had ever given it credit for. Iseult Verre kept her chair for a season, and then, with the quiet inevitability of a thing whose foundation has been said out loud, lost it to her granddaughter, who turned out, once she had stopped being a coward, to be very good indeed at running a house. And the safe match Solène, who had stood at the dowager's shoulder waiting for a succession that had just walked down off the dais and chosen a sugar artist, smiled the smile of a person who has lost a game she did not know she could lose, and went to find a softer house to marry into. I have to tell you about the first weeks, because the claim was the easy part. A claim is a single brave minute, and the house could not unmake it. But a family is not a minute. It is 10,000 ordinary ones, and we had to learn them from a standing start with 3 years of damage between us. Iseult did not know how to be a parent. She had never been parented, only raised into a structure, and she came to it the way she came to everything, carefully, watching, terrified of signing the wrong page. The first time she was alone with Pip, she texted me 4 times in an hour. She learned that Pip would not sleep without the copper thermometer, and she learned to check it was in the small fist before the light went out. She learned that the stillness she had passed down, the going quiet, the watching, the deciding, meant the child was overwhelmed and needed a hand to press flat against, the way she herself pressed her thumb to the scar, and she learned to offer her palm before Pip had to ask. Terror of a child's fever. A person who does not leave when the house asks her to. She did not leave. That is the whole of what I had needed to know 3 years ago in a severance room, with the door that did not open. And she spent that first year proving it, ordinary minute by ordinary minute, until the proving was just our life. I want to end where the sugar always ends, with the small thing from the beginning that turns out to be the whole thing, because my grandmother gave me a thermometer and a sentence, and they are the 2 halves of how this ends. A year later, I will give you the year later because you have earned it and so have I. I am not the night cake artist anymore, and I am not the anonymous agency hand, and I am not the Omega the house cut. I run the showpiece kitchen at Tarn and Verre, the real one, with my name on the door, because Iseult put it there and dared the board to object, and they did not, because the board has learned what the city already knew. We bonded the slow way after, in the daylight, on purpose, not out of an accident and not out of a debt and not in the dark, but chosen. A woman who watched my hands in a cold kitchen, and a woman who let herself be watched, finally allowed to be the thing we had been for one careful winter before the house got its hands on it. Pip has a father now, and a kitchen to grow up in, and she does not sleep with a lost shoe anymore because nothing of hers is lost. And there's a new drawing on the cold room wall, done in a steadier hand than the old one. 3 stick figures. And this time when I ask her who they are, she does not have to wonder. And the tallest one has gray eyes she colored in herself. That is the story I can tell here. The rest of it, the storm-locked night the wall came all the way down, the things 2 women say to each other when they finally stop being afraid. The year of learning how to love in the light, what we had only ever managed in the dark. That is the part I cannot tell on this side of the screen. It is on my Patreon, the link is in the description. And if you have come this far with me, you already know it was never a story about a company at all. Tell me in the comments about the truth you carried too long because you were afraid of what it would cost to say it. We have all carried one, and the worst night and the first night are so often the same night, and you do not always find out until a storm locks you in with it. Subscribe so you are here for the next one. And listen early. Sugar tells you the truth before it breaks. So do people.